The wind in the Dakota Territory was a lonely sound. For 5 years, it was the only friend Winona had. It scraped across the granite hills and whispered through the pines, and in the year 1884, it was a language she understood better than any other. Her world was this forgotten patch of dirt. Her life was a simple, hard rhythm of survival. She moved through the trees like a ghost. Her moccasins made no sound on the dry earth. She was checking her snares, her eyes scanning the familiar lines of the land. The flick of a bird's wing, the track of a coyote, she knew it all. But then she saw something that didn't belong, a shadow against the pale sky, a darkness hanging from the thick branch of a cottonwood tree down in a ravine. Her breath hitched in her chest. She froze, melting back into the trees. Her first thought, the one that had kept her alive for so long, was to run, to disappear. Whatever was hanging from that tree was the white man's trouble, and their trouble was a sickness she had learned to avoid. It had already stolen her family, her people, her whole world. But she didn't run. Something kept her feet planted on the ground, a grim curiosity, or maybe the ghost of a feeling she thought had died years ago. The wind turned the shape hanging from the tree. It was a man, but he wasn't hanging by his neck. His hands were tied together, thrown over the branch, his whole body suspended by the wrists. His head was slumped forward, a dead weight on his chest. From a distance, he looked gone. Just another body left for the crows. Against all her better judgment, she started moving closer, silent as a doe approaching a stream. The first thing that hit her was the smell, sour sweat and fear on the cold air. Then she saw the details, the raw, torn flesh of his wrists, the dark trails of dried blood down his arms. His boots were gone. His feet were bare, bruised, and purple. His shirt was ripped away, his chest exposed to the biting wind. And then she saw the brand. 2 words had been seared into the pale skin of his chest. The letters were ugly, weeping, and raw. Indian lover. The sight of it hit her like a punch to the gut. It was a brand of shame, a punishment meant to break a man, to cast him out. It was a kind of violence she knew in her bones. She wore her own version, not on her skin, but deep inside, in the solitude that had become her whole life. This stranger, this white man, had been condemned for a crime that tied his fate to her people. She stood at the base of the tree and looked up. His face was hidden by a mess of sweaty brown hair. A low groan, so quiet the wind almost stole it, escaped his lips. He was alive. The thought landed like a stone in her stomach. Leaving a dead man to the plains was one thing. Leaving a living one to die was another. This was a choice she never wanted to make. Her quiet, empty world was a fragile thing. This man was a tear in the fabric of her solitude. Her jaw tightened. She looked at the brutal letters on his chest again. The men who did this were white men. They hated him for the same reason they hated her. In that moment, a strange, bitter connection formed between them. It was as thin as a spider's thread, but it was there. He was an enemy of her enemies. It wasn't kindness that made her move. It was cold, hard logic. It was a defiance she'd forgotten she had. To leave him here was to let those men win. To save him was to spit in their eye. A silent act of war in a world that had tried to silence her for good. She pulled the knife from the sheath at her belt. The blade was old, but she kept it sharp. Reaching up, she started sawing at the thick rope around his wrists. It was slow work. His dead weight pulled the rope tight, and every cut was a struggle. His body swayed, and another pained sound came from his throat. With a loud snap, the rope broke. He fell in a heap at the foot of the tree, a broken tangle of arms and legs. He didn't move. For one terrifying second, she thought the fall had killed him. She knelt down, pressing 2 fingers against his neck. A pulse, faint and weak, but it was there. A stubborn little flicker of life. Winona looked around at the empty, endless land. She was alone with this broken man, this branded outcast. Dragging him back to her shelter, a small dugout hidden in the side of a hill, was a huge risk. If the men who did this came back, they'd find them both. But leaving him here meant leaving him for the wolves. She pushed the matted hair away from his face. He was younger than she'd thought. His face was pale and drawn under the dirt and blood. There were hard lines around his eyes, but not the cruelty she saw in the faces of other white men. In his face, she just saw pain. With a sigh that felt like it pulled up the last of her strength, she made her choice. She couldn't leave him. Whatever his story was, his fate was now tied to hers. She grabbed him under the arms, her muscles straining, and began to drag him away from the shadow of the cottonwood tree. The only sound was his body scraping against the hard, unforgiving ground, a sound that broke the long silence of the plains. The shelter wasn't much, just a hole dug into a hill, reinforced with old timber and packed earth. A thick animal hide was the only door. A small fire pit in the center was the only source of warmth. It smelled of smoke, dried herbs, and damp earth. It was her entire world. Bringing the stranger inside felt like a violation. She laid him on her own sleeping pallet of furs near the fire. His breathing was shallow, his skin like ice. For hours she worked, pushing away the storm of thoughts in her head. She cleaned the angry, weeping brand with a mix of herbs to fight off infection. Her touch was gentle, even though the wound made her stomach turn. It was a story of cruelty she could read all too well. She carefully dripped water between his cracked lips. She covered him with every blanket she had. His unconsciousness was a blessing. It let her tend to him without words, without having to face the man. He was just a body, a problem to solve. But as night fell and the fire cast dancing shadows on the earthen walls, the silence in her home changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the sound of another person's breathing, and that sound changed everything. He was in and out of a fever for 2 days. When his eyes opened, they were a startling, pale blue. They would fix on her, confused, sometimes afraid. He mumbled words that made no sense. "Water," he rasped once. She gave it to him. Cold, he shivered, and she added more wood to the fire. On the 3rd morning, she woke up and found him watching her. The fever was gone. The confusion in his eyes had been replaced by a weary intelligence. He'd propped himself up on one elbow, his eyes locked on her as she sat mending a glove. The silence stretched out, thick with questions. "Where am I?" he finally managed, his voice a dry croak. "My home," she said, her own voice quiet from disuse. She didn't offer anything more. He looked around the small dugout, at the earthen walls, the stacked firewood, the bundles of herbs hanging from the ceiling. His eyes fell to his own chest, where her poultice of herbs covered the brand. He flinched. Pain and shame flickered across his face. You cut me down," he said, more to himself than to her. Winona just nodded, her fingers never stopping their work. She wasn't going to make this easy for him. She saved his life, sure. That didn't make him a friend. He was still a white man. A danger. "Why?" he asked. The single word was raw. She stopped sewing. She finally met his eyes. Her own gaze was dark, impossible to read. "The men who did that," she said, her voice flat. "I do not like them." It was the simplest truth in the world, and for some reason, it seemed to be enough for him. He sank back onto the furs, a deep sigh rattling his body. He was too weak to ask for more. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was the silence of two people stuck in a small space, aware of each other in a way that was both strange and unavoidable. His name, she learned a day later, was Isaac Callahan. He offered it quietly. He didn't offer his story. She didn't ask for it. The brand on his chest told its own story. A story of a line that was crossed. She wondered about the woman. Was she Lakota? Cheyenne? Was she the reason he was hanging from that tree? The questions hung in the air between them unanswered. As Isaac got stronger, a new, awkward routine began. He was weak, but he insisted on helping. He fed the fire, his hands clumsy. He tried to clean their bowls after their meager meals of rabbit stew. His pride wouldn't let him be a total burden. Winona watched him. Her suspicion fought with a grudging respect. He didn't have the arrogance she expected. There was a quiet sadness in his eyes that she recognized. It was the look of someone who had lost everything. One evening, a late spring snowstorm hit, trapping them inside. The wind howled outside, and the firelight made the small dugout feel like the last safe place on earth. That's when he decided to talk. Her name was Soteo, he said, his voice low and rough. He was staring into the flames, his hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. Winona looked up from the basket she was weaving. She stayed silent, giving him the space to speak. She was Cheyenne, he went on, his eyes distant. I worked on the Vance Ranch, north of here. Her people were camped nearby. A deep, painful shadow crossed his face. Mr. Vance and his sons, they don't believe in mixing. He didn't need to say more. Winona could imagine the rest. A secret courtship, a discovery, the rage of men who saw the world in black and white. Is she? Winona started, her voice softer than she meant it to be. Isaac shook his head, a single, sharp movement. They drove her people off, burned their camp, told me they killed her. I don't know if it's true. I fought them hard. He touched his chest, right over the brand. This was their answer. They wanted me to die slow. A warning. The story hung in the air, heavy and raw. Winona felt something shift inside her. The story burned on his skin now had a name, a face. It was a story of love and hate that echoed her own losses in painful ways. She had also lost her family to the same kind of blind hatred. She reached out and placed a small piece of dried fruit on the stone beside him, a simple, wordless offering. He looked at it, then up at her. In his pale blue eyes, she saw something more than gratitude. It was understanding. He saw her, not as an Indian, but as someone who knew his grief. The snowstorm lasted for 3 days. Trapped together, the walls of suspicion began to crumble. He told her about his old life back east, a farm, a family lost to sickness, a journey west to find a new beginning that had ended on that tree. She found herself talking too. She told him about her little brother and the songs her mother used to sing. She didn't talk about the soldiers or the fire or the long run that brought her to this lonely hill. But she gave him pieces of the life that came before the silence. They were two people from warring worlds, thrown together by violence. And in the middle of all that desolation, a fragile connection began to grow. The brand on his chest wasn't just a scar anymore. It was the reason he was here. And for the first time in a very, very long time, Winona didn't feel completely alone. The days after the storm found a new rhythm, a fragile peace. Isaac, stronger now, took on more chores. He chopped firewood. He learned to check her snares. He never went far from the shelter, a silent admission of the danger that still waited out there. Their silences were comfortable now. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, him carving a piece of wood, her weaving a basket. In those moments, they weren't a white man and an Indian woman. They were just Isaac and Winona, two survivors finding a strange comfort in each other's company. But something was off. One afternoon, while he was outside, she was tidying his things. Tucked into a fold of his worn trousers, she found it, a small, tarnished silver locket. It was cold to the touch. Her fingers fumbled with the clasp. She knew she shouldn't open it. It was his. It was private. But she had to know. It clicked open. Inside, There wasn't a picture of Sauteo. There was a tiny, faded photograph of a different woman, a white woman, with a severe face and hair pulled back tight, and a small child standing beside her. Isaac's wife? His child? The story he told her, the one about coming west after losing his family to sickness. Was it a lie? The air in the dugout suddenly felt cold. The trust she had started to build turned to ice in her veins. Who was this man she had saved? What other secrets was he hiding? He had spoken of Soteo with such pain, such loss. Was that a lie, too? When he came back inside, she said nothing. She tucked the locket away, its cold metal a secret weight against her skin. She watched him now with new eyes. Every word he said, every quiet gesture, she questioned it. The peace they had found was gone, replaced by a tense, heavy suspicion. He could feel it. The warmth between them had vanished. "Winona, is something wrong?" he asked one evening. She just shook her head, unable to find the words. How could she ask? How could she confront him when she was hiding a secret of her own? The fragile world they had built was about to break, but not from the inside, from the outside. The first sign of trouble was a plume of dust on the northern horizon. It wasn't the wind. Winona saw it from the top of the hill where she gathered sage. Riders. Too many to be a simple patrol, coming from the direction of the Vance ranch. Her heart turned to a cold knot. She scrambled back to the shelter. "They're coming," she said, her voice low and urgent as she burst through the hide flap. Isaac was on his feet in an instant. The color drained from his face, replaced by a grim resolve. "How many?" "4, maybe more." "Vance," he breathed, the name a curse, "and his boys. They've come to finish the job." His eyes met hers, and in them she saw a fierce protectiveness that shocked her. "You have to go. Get away from here. This is my fight. It's not yours." Winona shook her head, a stubborn fire lighting in her chest. The locket, the lies, it didn't matter now. "This is my home," she said, the words surprising her with their power. "I will not run from it. Not again." A desperate plan formed in her mind. The land itself would be their weapon. The rocky hills, the dense thickets, the confusing game trails, these were her allies. "We won't fight them here," she said, her voice clear and steady. "This place is too open. We'll lead them west, into the broken lands. I know a place, a maze of canyons. Their anger will make them careless." Isaac listened, a flicker of hope in his eyes. He still didn't know that she knew about the locket. He just knew he trusted her. "Tell me what to do." They moved fast. They gathered what they could: water, dried meat, her knife. As they were about to leave, Isaac grabbed his trousers. She watched him, her heart pounding. Would he check for the locket? He just slung them over his shoulder. He didn't know. She led the way, setting a fast, silent pace. Isaac followed, no longer the broken man from the tree. He was fighting for his life, and for hers. They left a trail just clear enough for a tracker to follow. A deliberate invitation. A trap. As the sun began to set, they reached the edge of the broken lands. A labyrinth of steep canyons and dark shadows lay before them. Far behind, they could hear the faint sound of horses. They had taken the bait. "They are coming," Isaac said, his hand going to the scar on his chest. "Let them come," Winona replied, her voice a whisper in the growing dark. She turned to him. "Stay close. Do exactly as I say. The land will protect us." He looked at the fierce determination in her eyes and nodded. He owed her his life. Together they slipped down into the shadows of the canyons, disappearing into the earth like ghosts. The hunt had begun. The canyons were another world, a maze of stone and shadow under a sliver of moon. Winona moved through the darkness like she was born in it. She knew every turn, every dead end. Isaac followed so close he could feel the warmth from her back. Behind them, their pursuers grew louder. They were clumsy in this strange terrain. Curses echoed off the canyon walls. They were ranchmen, used to open spaces. Here, in the tight, winding corridors of the earth, they were blind. Winona's plan was simple. Separate them. Pick them off one by one. She stopped at a narrow fork. Climb, she whispered to Isaac, pointing to a series of handholds in the rock. Wait at the top. Don't make a sound. He hesitated. Winona. Go, she insisted. They'll see my tracks. They'll follow me. You have to be gone. He scrambled up the rock face. From the top, he watched her disappear down one fork of the canyon. Minutes later, the first rider appeared. A big, brutish man, one of Vance's sons. She went this way! He bellowed to the others. Tracks are fresh! He plunged into the canyon after her, arrogant and careless. Isaac held his breath. He heard a scuffle, a choked cry, and then silence, a heavy, terrible silence. A few moments later, Winona emerged from the shadows and climbed up to meet him. Her face was grim. She hadn't killed the man. She had just neutralized him. They repeated this deadly dance through the night. Winona created diversions, luring the men away from the group one by one. She was a phantom, using the land as her weapon. Finally, only 2 men were left. Old Man Vance and his eldest son, a man with a cruel face Isaac would never forget. They were more cautious now, their fear making them more dangerous. They found one of their fallen men, and their rage echoed through the canyons. Witch! Vance roared. Indian witch! Show yourself! Show us the man you're hiding! Winona and Isaac were pressed into a narrow crevice high on a canyon wall. Isaac trembled with rage. He wanted to leap down and face the man who had ordered him branded. But Winona's hand was on his arm, a firm, steady pressure. Not yet. They had reached the heart of her trap, a large, bowl-shaped canyon. At one end was a steep, seemingly impossible rock slide. We go there, Winona whispered. There's a tunnel near the base. They will think we're trapped. It was their last chance. They scrambled down into the bowl, making just enough noise to be heard. Vance and his son spurred their horses forward, their faces lit with triumph. Nowhere left to run, Callahan! Vance shouted, raising his rifle. Isaac stepped in front of Winona, shielding her with his body. The broken man from the tree was gone. Leave her out of this, Vance, Isaac said, his voice strong. Your quarrel is with me. Vance laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. My quarrel is with anyone who forgets their place. You'll die together. He aimed his rifle, but then a new sound began, a low rumble that grew into a deafening roar. High above them, on the ridge, a series of massive boulders held in place by a single log began to shift. It was a deadfall trap Winona had set years ago. The rock slide began. A thundering cascade of rock and dirt poured down the side of the canyon. Not on them, but right in the path of Vance and his son. Their horses screamed and threw them to the ground. When the dust settled, Vance and his son were trapped on the far side of a massive wall of rock, unhorsed, disarmed, and lost. Their reign of terror was over. But as they turned to leave, the eldest son, Jeb, screamed something that froze them in their tracks. You think this is over, Callahan? She's still ours. We sold her to the mines at Black Creek. She's as good as dead. Isaac stared at him, his face a mask of horror. Soteo, alive. She was alive. This whole time, the Vances hadn't killed her. They had sold her. The victory turned to ash in their mouths. This wasn't the end. It was a new, more terrible beginning. Winona grabbed Isaac's hand. Now, she said, pulling him toward the hidden tunnel. They slipped through, emerging into the pre-dawn light. Behind them, Vance's screams were swallowed by the stone. They didn't look back. The hunt was over, but the war had just begun. They returned to the shelter as the sun rose. The world felt different, washed clean by the violence of the night. But there was no peace. Jeb Vance's words echoed in the small space. She's still ours. We sold her to the mines at Black Creek. Isaac collapsed onto the furs, exhausted, but his eyes burned with a new fire. Black Creek, he whispered. I know that place. It's a death camp. No one comes back from there. Winona looked at him. The secret of the locket felt small and pointless now. A living person, a woman he had cared for, was in mortal danger. This was bigger than lies or broken trust. We have to go, Isaac said, looking at her, his eyes pleading. Winona, I have to go after her, but I can't ask you. You do not have to ask, she said simply. Her own people had been lost, scattered, killed. The chance to save one person, to pull someone back from the brink, was a chance she had to take. But first, there was the locket. She pulled it from her pouch and held it out to him. Who is this? Isaac stared at the locket in her hand. The color drained from his face. He looked from the locket to her, and the shame in his eyes was absolute. That was my wife, Mary, and my son, Thomas. He finally told her the whole truth. They hadn't died of sickness back east. He had left them. He had run from a life that was suffocating him, a loveless marriage, a future he didn't want. He came west to disappear, to start over. He met Soteo, and for the first time, he felt something real. The story about his family dying was a lie he told to make his past sound more tragic, less selfish. I was a coward, he said, his voice choked. I ran away, and then I met Soteo, and I loved her. Vance took her from me because he thought I wasn't worthy, and he was right. The confession lay between them, raw and painful. Winona looked at the broken man before her. He wasn't the hero she had imagined. He was flawed, and he had made selfish choices, but he was also willing to walk into a death camp to save the woman he loved. Perhaps he wasn't a coward anymore. We all have a past we run from, she said quietly. Now we run towards something. Their journey to Black Creek was hard and fast. They traveled light, pushing themselves to the limit. The rage and guilt drove Isaac forward, and a grim determination drove Winona. This was no longer just his fight. It was hers, too. Black Creek wasn't a town. It was a scar on the land, a collection of shacks and tents huddled around a massive mining operation that tore into the earth. It was guarded by armed men with dead eyes, and the air stank of sweat and despair. They watched the camp from a ridge for 2 days, learning the patterns, the guard rotations. The workers were a mix of poor whites, Chinese laborers, and captured natives. They were all treated like animals, worked until they dropped. Finding Soteo in that hellscape would be nearly impossible. We need a distraction, Winona said. A big one. Their plan was desperate. Winona, using her knowledge of herbs, created a series of smoke bombs that would produce a thick, acrid smoke. Isaac, who had worked with dynamite on the railroad, would create a diversion by setting a small, controlled charge at the far end of the camp, near the stables. In the chaos, Winona would slip into the women's quarters to find Soteo. The night of their attack was moonless and cold. Isaac crept toward the stables, his heart pounding. Winona moved like a shadow toward the long, grim barracks where the women were kept. The explosion was bigger than they expected. It ripped through the stables, and the sound echoed like thunder. Men shouted, horses screamed, and chaos erupted. In that moment, Winona threw her smoke bombs. Thick, choking clouds billowed through the camp, adding to the confusion. She slipped through the door of the women's barracks. It was a nightmare inside. Dozens of women, thin and exhausted, were huddled in fear. Soteo, Winona whispered urgently. Soteo of the Cheyenne. A young woman with haunted eyes looked up. She was thin, her hair was shorn, but it was her. I am she whispered. Isaac sent me, Winona said quickly. We are getting you out. Just then, the door burst open. The camp overseer, a mountain of a man with a scarred face and a whip in his hand, stood there, his eyes finding them in the smoke. Going somewhere? He snarled. He lunged for Soteo. Winona moved faster. She drove her knife into his leg, and he roared in pain. She grabbed Soteo's arm and pulled her out into the pandemonium of the camp. Men were running everywhere. Gunshots rang out. Isaac, his face blackened with soot, appeared out of the smoke. His eyes met Soteo's, and for a split second, the world stood still. There were no words, just a look of disbelief and a love that had survived hell itself. Then the moment was gone. "This way!" he yelled, and they ran. They scrambled out of the camp and into the dark wilderness, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. They didn't stop running until the sun came up. They found refuge in a small cave. Soteo was weak, but she was alive. She and Isaac held each other, their reunion a quiet, tearful thing. Winona stood watch, giving them their space. She had done it. She had saved someone. She had fought back against the darkness and won. But as she watched them, a profound loneliness washed over her. She had brought them together, but where did she belong now? Her solitude had been broken, but she wasn't part of their world. A few days later, when Soteo was stronger, they talked about the future. "My people are north, in the high country," Soteo said. "They think I am dead. We must go to them." She looked at Isaac. "You will come with me." It wasn't a question. Isaac nodded, his hand never leaving hers. Then they both looked at Winona. "Thank you," Soteo said, her voice filled with a gratitude so deep it was humbling. "You saved my life. We owe you everything. Come with us. Be our sister." Isaac looked at her, his pale blue eyes full of hope. "Come with us, Winona. We can make a home. Together. All of us." Winona looked at the two of them. They had a future, a people to return to, a life to build. Then she thought of her empty dugout on the hill, the silence, the lonely wind. She had thought that was her home. But her home wasn't a place. Isaac had been right about that. It was something you make. She looked at their outstretched hands, and for the first time in a long, long time, she smiled. A real smile. She had run from the world for 5 years. Now she was done running. She was ready to walk back into it. This story is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, courage can light a path forward. If you were inspired by Winona's journey from solitude to savior, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of impossible odds and unbreakable spirits. And let us know in the comments below, what does the word home mean to you?